May 14th, 1998. The desert air in West Hollywood was still, but the silence inside the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center was heavier than stone. Frank Sinatra, the man whose voice had defined the 20th century, the man they called the Voice, the chairman of the board, and simply Old Blue Eyes, had just taken his final breath. The world outside was preparing to mourn a legend, to play My Way on every radio station from Hoboken to Tokyo. But weeks later, deep within the archives of his sprawling compound in Palm Springs, a single, unmarked audio reel was allegedly discovered by a loyal archivist. It wasn't a studio master. It wasn't a polished track for a new album. It was a rough, grainy recording made in the dead of night, just months before the end. There were no orchestras, no Nelson Riddle arrangements, no applause. Just the sound of ice clinking in a glass, the strike of a lighter and a voice, weathered, raspy, but unmistakably his, speaking into the void. This tape, which remained a whisper among insiders for years, wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. It was the moment the tuxedo came off, the lights went down, and Francis Albert Sinatra finally told the truth about the ghosts that had been sitting in the front row of his life for 80 years. By the way, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? The existence of this recording, often referred to as the Desert Confession, paints a picture of a man who knew the curtain was falling and needed to set the record straight, not for the newspapers, but for his own soul. The tape begins with the sound of a heavy sigh, followed by the familiar rhythmic tap of a ring against a glass of Jack Daniels. The first words recorded were not a song lyric, but a simple, devastating admission. I've spent my whole life singing to a crowd of thousands, yet I've never felt more alone than I do right now. For the first 20 minutes of the tape, Sinatra didn't speak of his triumphs. He didn't talk about the Oscars, the Grammys, or the nights at the Sands. He talked about the silence. He described the terrifying quiet that awaited him after the shows ended, after the boys went home, after the adoration faded into the hum of the air conditioner. "You think you know what silence is," he whispered, his voice cracking with age. "But you don't know silence until you're the most famous man on earth, sitting in a room full of gold records, wishing the phone would ring just so you could hear a human voice that didn't want something from you." This vulnerability sets the stage for what is perhaps the most heartbreaking segment of the recording. His apology to the Rat Pack. For decades, the world saw them as the ultimate boys' club: Frank, Dean, Sammy, Peter, and Joey. They were the kings of cool, the summit of style. But on this tape, the bravado was gone. Frank addressed Dean Martin directly, even though Dean had passed away 3 years prior in 1995. The pain in Sinatra's voice was raw, stripping away the myth of their invincibility. "Dino," he said, sounding like a man speaking to a ghost across the room, "I never told you. I never told you that I was jealous. You had something I never did. You could walk away. You didn't need the applause. You could play golf, drink your drink, and be happy. Me? I was starving for it. I pushed you away because I couldn't understand how you could be so content with silence." He paused, the sound of liquid pouring filling the gap. "When we stopped speaking, that wasn't pride, Dino. That was fear. I was afraid that without you guys, I was just a singer from Jersey again. I'm sorry I didn't hold your hand at the end. I'm sorry I let the silence win." This confession rewrites the history of their drifting apart. It wasn't just business. It was Frank's deep-seated insecurity masked as arrogance. He revealed that after Dean's death, he would often set a place for him at the dinner table, a glass of bourbon sitting untouched, waiting for a toast that would never come. It was a glimpse into the crushing loneliness of outliving your own era, of being the last lion left in the jungle. If you love stories like this, Subscribe for new stories so you don't miss the next chapter. But the tape didn't stop at friendship. It ventured into the most turbulent territory of all: his heart. Everyone knew that Ava Gardner was the love of his life. Their marriage in the early 50s was a hurricane of passion, jealousy, and destruction. But what Frank said on this tape went beyond the tabloids. He spoke to her as if she were sitting on the piano bench beside him. "Ava," he murmured, the name sounding like a prayer and a curse all at once. "They said you broke me. They said I lost my voice because of you. But the truth is, you were the only one who ever really saw me. You saw the scared little boy from Hoboken underneath the fedora." He recounted a night in 1951, a night no biography has ever fully detailed. He described driving through the streets of Los Angeles at 3 a.m., blinded by tears, believing his career was over and his love was gone. He confessed that he had driven to the edge of a cliff, staring down into the darkness, ready to drive off. "I was ready to check out, baby," he admitted. "But then I heard a melody, just a melody in my head, and I realized that if I died, the music died with me. So I turned the car around. I didn't come back for the fame. I came back because I had to sing the pain out. Every sad song I ever sang, every one for my baby, it was always you, Ava. It was always you." The revelation that his greatest artistic heights were born from a moment of near-suicidal despair adds a haunting layer to his discography. It suggests that his comeback wasn't just a career move, it was a survival mechanism. He sang to stay alive. The recording then shifted tone, moving from the personal to the professional, but with a surprising twist. Frank Sinatra, the man who famously battled with rock and roll, who called it disgraceful, addressed the man who took the crown he never wanted to give up: Elvis Presley. For years, the media painted them as enemies, the old guard versus the new. But Frank's private thoughts were far more complex. "They tried to make us hate each other, kid," he said, addressing the memory of the king. "But I watched you. I saw the panic in your eyes. I saw the way the colonel put you in a cage. I knew that cage. I built one for myself." He confessed that when he heard Elvis had died in 1977, he went into his backyard and sat by the pool for hours without moving. "I should have reached out," Frank whispered. "I should have told you that the crown is heavy, that the applause is a drug, and the withdrawal kills you. I failed you, Elvis. I let you drown because I was too busy protecting my own island." It was an acknowledgement of a brotherhood of fame, a tragic realization that only those at the very top can truly understand the air up there, and he had let a fellow traveler fall. But there was still something Frank hadn't touched on, a topic that had shadowed him his entire life. The mob. The whispers, the FBI files, the Kennedys. The tape grew staticky here, as if the atmosphere in the room had shifted. He didn't confess to crimes. He didn't name names. Instead, he spoke of the burden of obligation. "They call it respect," he grunted, his voice hardening, "but it feels like a debt you can never pay off. I walked through doors that were held open by men with dark eyes. I sang for them because they were the only ones who hired me when I was down. Loyalty. In my neighborhood, loyalty was the only currency. But the interest rate on that loyalty, it cost me my freedom." He spoke of John F. Kennedy with a profound sense of betrayal. Not that Kennedy betrayed him, but that the world forced them apart. "Jack," he said, his voice softening again, "we could have changed the world. But they wouldn't let a singer sit at the table with a president. I tore up the floorboards of my house for you. I built a helipad for you. And when you didn't come, it wasn't the embarrassment that hurt. It was the realization that to the powerful men, I was just the court jester. I was just the entertainment." This segment reveals the deep wound of class insecurity that never left him. No matter how many millions he made, he still felt like the kid from the wrong side of the tracks, who wasn't quite good enough for the high society he entertained. As the tape continued, a new theme emerged, one that contradicted the image of the volatile, brawling Sinatra. He began to list names, not famous names, not politicians or actresses, but names like Mrs. Higgins from Chicago, the kid with the leukemia in Ohio, the struggling actor who couldn't pay his rent. He began to recite a litany of secret charities. "I never wanted the plaques," he said. "I never wanted the dinners in my honor. I just wanted to know that when I go upstairs, the big man knows I didn't just take. I gave." He detailed a story about Bela Lugosi, the old Dracula actor who died penniless. Frank admitted, "I paid for his funeral. I never met the guy, but I knew what it felt like to be forgotten. No one should be buried in a pine box if they gave the world dreams." He spoke of sending checks to hospitals under the name Anonymous, totaling millions over the decades. "They called me a bully," he chuckled softly. "Maybe I was, but I was a bully who couldn't stand to see a little guy get crushed." This was the paradox of Frank Sinatra, a man who would flip a table in a rage but would empty his bank account to save a stranger's dignity. If this story is moving you, please take a moment to subscribe for new stories. It helps us bring more hidden histories to light. Then, the recording became deeply personal, turning toward his children, Nancy, Frank Jr., and Tina. The guilt in his voice was palpable, heavy enough to crush the breath out of the listener. "I was a good singer," he stated flatly, "but I was a lousy father. I was always leaving. The suitcase was my best friend and my worst enemy." He addressed Frank Jr. specifically, referencing the kidnapping in 1963 that had terrified him to his core. "When they took you, Frankie, I died. The man who came back wasn't me. I realized that all the power, all the connections, all the money, it couldn't stop 3 punks from taking my boy. I carried that fear every day. I was hard on you because I was terrified the world would eat you alive like it tried to eat me." He spoke of the burden of the name. "Sinatra," he said. "It's a heavy coat to wear, kids. I'm sorry I draped it over your shoulders before you were big enough to carry it." It was a moment of pure parental regret, the realization that his shadow was so large it had eclipsed the people he loved most. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He sounded like a man who knew he didn't deserve it, which made the confession all the more painful. As the tape neared its end, around the 40-minute mark, the sound of the piano returned. He played a few chords, jazzy, discordant, then resolving into a familiar melody. It was the opening to "One for My Baby" and "One More for the Road." But he didn't sing the lyrics we know. He spoke them, improvising, turning the song into a conversation with God. "It's 2:45, he whispered. "There's no one in the place except you and me. So set 'em up, Joe." But who is Joe? Is Joe the angel of death? Is Joe the guy who turns out the lights? He laughed, a dry, coughing sound. "I've been singing to Joe for 50 years. I think I'm finally ready to meet him. I hope he makes a good martini." He then addressed the concept of the voice itself, his instrument. "I treated it like a rental car," he admitted. "I smoked, I drank, I screamed. I abused the gift. But you know what? It sounded better when it was broken. When I was young, I sang like a violin. When I got old, I sang like a cello. The cracks, that's where the life got in." This was a profound artistic statement. He knew his voice had deteriorated, but he viewed that deterioration not as a loss, but as an evolution of truth. He was telling us that perfection is boring. Pain is interesting. The final minutes of the tape are described by the few who have heard them as almost spiritual. The anger was gone. The regret had washed away. There was just a sense of acceptance. He spoke of his mother, Dolly, the fierce political powerhouse who had forged his ambition. "Dolly," he said, "you pushed me so hard I almost broke. But you knew. You knew I couldn't be ordinary. I'm coming to see you, Ma. Don't yell at me about the hair." He paused for a long time. The tape hissed with the ambient noise of the desert night. "I did it my way," he whispered, quoting his signature anthem but stripping it of its bombast. It wasn't a boast anymore. It was a simple statement of fact. "I made a mess of things. I loved hard, I fought hard, I lost hard. But I didn't pretend. In a world of phonies, I was the real deal. Maybe that's enough." Suddenly, there is a sound of movement. A chair scraping against the floor. Footsteps moving toward the window. You can hear him opening the sliding glass door to the patio. The sound of the wind chimes in the desert breeze enters the recording. "Listen to that," Frank said, his voice distant now. "That's the only music that matters. The wind. It doesn't ask for an encore. It just blows." He then offered a final, cryptic message to his fans, to the millions who had bought the records and screamed at the Paramount. "You were the only relationship that lasted. You never left me. Even when I was down, you were there. I sang for you because I couldn't talk to you. Every song was a conversation I was too scared to have. Thank you for listening to the guy at the end of the bar." The tape ends abruptly. There is no goodbye. Just a click. When the family allegedly found this tape, the reaction was silence. It was too raw, too personal to release to a world that wanted the caricature of the fedora-wearing swinger. It was locked away, a private artifact of a public life. But the existence of the story, passed down through whispers in the industry, changes how we hear his music. Now, when you listen to Angel Eyes or In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning, you aren't just hearing a song. You are hearing the man on the tape. You are hearing the man who drove to the cliff edge and turned back. Subscribe for new stories if you want to uncover more secrets of the legends we love. The legacy of Frank Sinatra is usually measured in records sold or movies made. But this lost confession suggests his true legacy was his resilience. He was a man who felt everything, every slight, every heartbreak, every note, with a devastating intensity. He carried the emotional weight of the 20th century in his throat. Years later, a close associate of the family, who claimed to have heard the recording, said that the most striking thing wasn't the words, but the tone. He sounded like a man who had finally put down a heavy suitcase he'd been carrying since 1915, the associate said. He sounded light. In his final days, as he lay in the hospital room, his daughter Nancy reported that his final words were, "I'm losing." But perhaps if we consider the tape, he wasn't talking about dying. Maybe he was admitting that the fight was over. And for a man who had fought for every inch of ground he ever stood on, losing the need to fight was the ultimate victory. He was finally allowing himself to rest. Today, if you go to Palm Springs, you can stand outside the walls of the Twin Palms estate. The wind still blows through the palm trees, making that music Frank admired at the end of the tape. And if you listen closely, in the stillness of the desert night, you might just hear the faint clink of ice in a glass, and a voice saying, "Set 'em up, Joe." It wasn't just a career. It was a life lived at the highest volume, ending in a whisper that echoed louder than any trumpet blast. The chairman of the board had adjourned the meeting, but the minutes of that meeting, the truth of who he really was, remain etched in the hearts of those who look beyond the legend to find the man. Before we conclude, remember to subscribe for new stories and join our community of history lovers. We often wonder what these icons think about when the applause stops. We assume they are filled with pride. But Frank's desert confession teaches us that they are filled with the same questions we all have. Did I love enough? Did I forgive enough? Did I matter? Frank Sinatra answered those questions in the dark, with a glass in his hand, leaving us one final unscripted masterpiece. A song without music, sung by a soul that was finally, truly free. Francis Albert Sinatra, 1915 to 1998. He did it his way, and in the end, he told us what that really cost. And that is why, decades later, the world is still listening. Subscribe for new stories to keep the legacy alive.